Hi, I'm Jake from Cryonaut Media. Welcome to episode 8 of Cryonaut TV. Today I'm going to give a brief overview of some starting waveforms and why it matters which one you pick. When you start doing some sound design or choosing which sounds you want on your synths, the most important part of that process is picking your starting waveform. A lot of times you can choose things like a saw wave, sine wave, square wave, or other kind of variations like that. Those are the three main ones you're going to pick from. So in Silent 1, where you find that info is up here in the oscillator section where it says wave. You click on that, boom, there's all your options. So again, sine, saw, this time we have a triangle, pulse, same as a square wave, and then a couple other settings of that pulse wave. Sometimes you can choose, you're like a dial for how much of a pulse you want, how much for the square wave. Other times you just get one setting, or in this case, 3. Now, if we look in FM8, we have the same thing over here, all the different waveforms. You can choose from a whole bunch of different things here. But again, we have sine, triangle, square, sawtooth. Sawtooth and saw are the same. And then a bunch of other options, and then some really unique ones to FM synthesis, especially for format waves and everything. And if we get into the Tal Electro synth, a really great free synth from the Tal line, the Togu audio line. Here we have oscillators 1 and 2, and again, you kind of choose right here which waveform you want. Do you want saw, pulse, triangle, sine, and again, oscillator 2. And another great freeware synth, we have the Tyrell N6. Here we have the different shapes you can choose from for oscillator 1, and then shape 2, you choose from a dial, and you can kind of blend them together, which is sort of unique. So if you go all the way down here, it's going to be sort of a saw wave, more of a triangle, another different kind of saw, square. So you can just kind of mess with it a little bit there. And lastly, serum. Again, you have a whole bunch of different options here. You can choose in a drop-down list here all your different kind of waveforms. You can cycle through the wave table, which is very unique to wavetable synthesis, which is what serum is. And if you really just want the basic shapes, you can go to analog basic shapes. And then once you click on it, you can kind of see the different wavetable positions. So sine, and then saw, triangle, square, different pulses. So just all these different synths have a different look to them and where you find your oscillators and your waveforms. But you can see that there's kind of a standard of a basic few that you can always find. So back to Silent 1. There's a lot of different ways that you can start your sound design, but personally I think picking your waveform is the best and really the only way you should be doing it. The main reason for that is if you start with like a sine wave, but you end up wanting to get a more aggressive kind of sound, you're going to have a really hard time with it trying to get that from a sine wave. You'd be much better off starting with a square or a saw wave. And same thing, if you start with a saw wave, but you end up wanting a more chill sound, it's a lot harder to get what you're wanting from that. Whereas if you start with a sine wave, it's a lot simpler. The second thing you need to decide, what kind of sound are you making? Is it going to be a bass line? Is it going to be a lead or a pad or something like that? So really it matters, is it going to be a higher end sound or is it going to be a lower end sound? So I'm just going to go through these different waveforms here and kind of explain what they're good for and why you want to choose that waveform. So first of all, a saw wave. It's a very good sound in general for electronic music. It sounds like this. I'm going to be playing a bunch of random notes across a few octaves so you can kind of hear how it changes as you go up and down the octaves. So you can hear it's a pretty buzzy sound. It's more of an aggressive kind of sound. If you think about like rock music, the guitars that have all that distortion kind of sound aggressive and loud. That's what a saw wave is going to be great for. It's not going to be good for really calm, relaxing music typically. So if we come over here to the filter and choose a low pass, let's open up the cutoff all the way. This will help tame the sound a little bit. So if you wanted to say, hey, why don't you just add a filter to a saw wave, then it's the same as a sine wave. It's not quite the same, and let me show you why. As we play this note, you hear all that buzziness, and we'll bring the cutoff down. So with the cutoff down pretty low at this point, you can hear that it's not nearly as buzzy as it was before, not very aggressive, but there still is a little bit of buzz to it. So for something like a bass line, this could be really good. If you want to have just a little bit of that buzz like to the sound, a little bit different than a sine wave, give it some kind of middle harmonics, not even high harmonics. However, if you're going to go for a high sound, it's not typically as good. I guess you could still do that if you wanted to. I mean, you can do kind of whatever you want in music, but it's not the same as a sine wave. And to get rid of all those harmonics, you had to bring the cutoff down so low that there's basically nothing coming through the filter anymore. So now, if we bypass that and change this to a sine wave, you can hear that sounds really smooth, really pure. And even with that filter cutoff before, it didn't sound that way. So if you really want like really smooth and relaxing sounds, sine wave is your best bet. Hands down, you can't ever beat that. Now, if you want to go back to the aggressive kind of sound, let's go with a pulse, just to hear the difference. So just depending on your wavelength of the pulse, like the pulse width, I guess you'd call it, the sound will change. You'll have more higher harmonics or more low harmonics. So that is completely subjective, whatever you want to do for your sound. Now, another thing is, depending on what kind of sound, like if you want to have the super saw kind of thing, you know, the very standard chords, let's bring this up to like 7, add some detune. You have that really cool sound, and as you play a chord, it sounds huge with a saw wave. If we put a sine wave on that, it's a little bit different than just one voice, but you kind of lose a lot of that. And part of the reason is all the phase cancellation that's happening. When you're playing 7 sine waves, they're going to overlap, and so that's why you hear that kind of, well, it gets quieter and then a little bit louder and quieter again. Those are all those sine waves that are overlapping and canceling each other out pretty frequently. With a saw wave, you just have so many harmonics across the board that it's not going to cancel out the majority of everything because there's so many other harmonics going on. So if you wanted to layer a lot of sounds together, a lot of voices for your super chords, a sine wave is not a good option for that most of the time. I can't really think of any time I would ever use that. But a saw wave is awesome. That sounds amazing. Now, if we go to like a square wave, same thing. Lots of high harmonics, so it works really well. It sounds a little different than a saw wave, so it's kind of personal choice. If you want more of that like hollow, metallic, more electronic kind of sound, then a square wave or a pulse wave is going to be a pretty good option. So that's a brief overview of the 3 major types of waveforms, really the sine wave, the square wave, and the saw wave. Those are ones you're going to pretty much find in any synth out there. Of course, then you have other things that are a little bit more specific, like this tri-saw. Let's bring it back down to 1, which is sort of like a triangle and a saw wave combined. It's a little unique, but again, it's just a little bit different, like a slight variation from a saw wave or something. So all these different other waveforms that you can find are going to be a little bit different than other ones, but they kind of fall in the same category as a saw wave, let's say. So if you don't really like the sound of your saw wave, you know, try one of these other little ones. Maybe you'll find something you like. Now, since we also showed how a saw wave with a filter doesn't quite get the same sound as a sine wave, if we bring this back to a sine wave and then add some distortion, you'll see that this doesn't, it sounds better if you wanted a more aggressive sound, but it still doesn't quite get you the same as a saw wave. So without any distortion, here's a sine wave. And then as we add that in, it's almost to the point of a saw wave, but you can tell it's not quite the same still. I mean, even if you put a filter, it's just not, it's very different. It can get you closer to what you want, and if you wanted to kind of deviate from the same thing every single time, then yeah, try a sine wave with lots of distortion on it. It'll get you a different sound, and maybe that's what you want sometimes. But the whole point of this is, if you choose one starting waveform, it's going to get you a drastically different sound in the end than by choosing a different one. So you can go through and just randomly pick a waveform, put a bunch of effects on it, and see what happens. But you're going to end up with a lot better results and a lot faster if you kind of think about, what do you want from this? Are you making a bass? Are you making a lead, a pad, chords, something like that? And then what kind of a sound do you want? Do you want more of an aggressive sound? Do you want more of a soothing, calm sound? Do you want more of an electronic kind of feel or more of an analog feel? And then pick your starting waveform from the start. Then go and add all the effects, add the voices, the detune, whatever. But pick your starting waveform first. And if you don't know which one you want, that's okay too. Feel free to experiment with it, but don't do that every single time. Like, if you've been producing for a couple of years, you should know what kind of waveforms get you the sounds that you like personally. So personally, I like the square wave a lot. I like that kind of metallic-y electronic feel to it. The saw wave tends to be a little bit too harsh for me, so I always put a filter on that, even just a little bit. Something like this. Very buzzy, but not. It calms down some of the really high-end stuff. So hopefully that helps you understand a little bit more about the few different starting waves you can choose from, and some of the other options that you'll have, the more specialty ones, and kind of the reason why it's so important that you pick your starting waveform when you begin. So go out there and start with your waveform and build your sound from there. So thanks for watching. Go ahead and like and subscribe for the video, and in the comments below, just let me know, what is your favorite starting waveform and why. Do you prefer sine waves for the majority of your sounds? Do you prefer saw waves? Which ones do you like? So again, thanks for watching. I'm Jake from Cryonaut Media, and don't forget to come watch me produce live on twitch.tv/cryosion. I'll put a link in the description below. And you can see me build a song from scratch and work through that whole process, or sometimes I'll be doing some sound design things on there, creating some patches for instruments that I like, whatever. But just come check it out, and I'll see you guys next time.